Tess Moodie, who goes by the pronouns they, them, is a proud, queer, non-binary, neurodivergent First Nations person with multiple forms of disability, including a genetic disorder, who lives on a large farm in northwest, or I would have to get you to pronounce this for me, my apologies, in Tasmania. Did you want to jump in there, Tess, to say that correctly? My apologies.
It's lutruwita.
Lutruwita, thank you. I will repeat that one.
Thank you.
Tess is a victim survivor of multiple forms of family and sexual violence across their lifespan. Tess is passionate about empowering people with lived experience to bring systemic change and embedding lived experience in the prevention of family, domestic, and sexual violence, including, health, LGBTIQA plus activism, and advocating for disability rights. They currently work embedding lived experience and family sexual violence as a youth engagement lead at Laurel House Tasmania and an independent lived experience consultant. They are also a victim survivor expert advisor for Victoria's peak family violence organisation, Safe and Equal, and a founding director of the recently established Independent Collective of Survivors, or ICOS, or ICOS, Australia's first national peak organisation led by victim survivors. For the last 3 years, they have worked in participatory collaborative research with the University of Technology in Sydney in autistic-led research, developing research priorities for autistic women, girls, and gender-diverse people. Tess loves to spend their time with family, venturing on the country into the forest with their family and sausage dog Luna, and loves a good gluten-free lasagna. Lovely to have you, Tess. I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. And yes, I do love a good gluten-free lasagna. Hello again, everybody. This is my third time today. Across the 2 days coming in. Hopefully you're not sick of me yet. Today, I'm going to be presenting on ethical and authentic engagement with lived experience. So this is some of my learnings that I've had across my time working in this space. It will capture some of what I've drawn on from other frameworks, how that's evolved for me as a lived experience practitioner, but also from my 3 o'clock in the morning little rants I have to myself when I can't sleep. So yeah, I'd like to just begin with an acknowledgement of country, and I won't do a long one because I've done a long one today. But I'd just like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians and First Peoples of the land on which we meet today. And I'd just like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to those who have advocated for positive social and political change in regards to mental health and mental health advocacy, in a call for us to be able to live our lives more free from violence, discrimination, stigma, erasure and marginalisation. And finally, I'd just like to acknowledge any other victim survivors who are in the room today. A little bit about me. Ben did a really good intro there to explain who I am. So I just might add to that to say that I came to this work not with a university degree or a PhD or a postgrad or anything like that on working with lived experience. How I came to this work was I was working as a counsellor, a sexual assault counsellor. That was my background. And I got to a place where I thought, I am tired of trying to fix everyone at the bottom. I really want to get in at the top and try and change systems. So then I moved over into lived experience work. My introduction to that was being trained as a media advocate under a program that Our Watch initially ran years ago. And then I moved into a coordinator role of coordinating 37 other victim survivors to do advocacy. So I worked in that peer model. So yeah, along the way in that journey, I've engaged in multiple ways as a lived experience advocate. And today I'm just going to share some of my own learnings from working in embedding that lived experience in policy, service delivery, legislation, primary prevention and more. What I've learned from working in this space for over a decade, it's really transferable to working in lived experience in any context, including mental health advocacy. And I'm hoping that my presentation today will enrich learnings for both people from organisations who are in the room today, but also other lived experience advocates. For organisations who are here today, my presentation will speak to you in the way of what you can do to ensure you're practising ethical and authentic engagement. But for individuals who are lived experience advocates, I'm really hoping that my presentation will give you something to take away and think about for when you're doing your work as an advocate, so you can cast that critical lens and sort of an audit tool over when you're being engaged to make sure people are doing things in an ethical way. So I'm hoping everyone gets something from it. And so important for you to have these tools to use in your work, because this will ensure that you're valued and respected for the experts that you are. So this is a piece that takes away that we're not happy to have this tokenistic way of engaging with us anymore, because, yeah, we're experts. I just wanted to share a little bit about the relationship between victim survivor advocacy and mental health advocacy, because whilst most of my work's heavily been in the victim survivor advocacy space, I know that there are so many crossovers, you know, a Gantt chart sort of situation. So I just wanted to speak to that for a little minute. So just to give some context around this, in regards to domestic, family and sexual violence and mental illness in women, this is you know, it's a mental illness issue. Violence is a mental illness issue. So just to speak quickly to this one, obviously, you know, children who've experienced domestic family violence are more likely to experience mental health issues. The same with women who've experienced domestic family and sexual violence, but also men and boys who experience child sexual abuse are more likely to have impacts on their mental health. So that speaks to the crossover there that we have around mental health advocacy and victim survivor advocacy, because violence is a health issue. I just wanted to use that slide to just sort of bring together, you know, what I talked about today and the relevance across the two spaces. So levels of lived experience participation. This is a bit of a ladder that I believe depicts the different ways that advocates can be engaged in lived experience. And it's a bit of a ladder from, you know, the most simplest things that you can do, or the least engaged things that you can do, right up until leadership. So obviously, you know, down at the bottom, the advise piece is when organisations use what you know from people with lived experience to inform the work that they're doing, but not necessarily engaging directly with them. Whereas the consult piece is more about consulting with lived experience advocates and getting their opinions and feedback on pieces of work that may be created, but not necessarily creating that with them. The include is more around involving advocates in changes to existing policy or practice to assist with work. So being involved, but not at that equal level. And then the collaborate is working equally together, creating the work, sharing the power, and everybody's on that equal landing field there. Lead, I see lead as, you know, top of the ladder, up there. This is next level, training, empowering, mentoring other advocates to do the work in their own right and providing them with everything they need to take ownership and leadership of their work. In the perfect world, I'd have us all up there in collaborate and lead, and we wouldn't be doing the bottom of the ladder bits. But having said that, it's all important, and people have different comfort levels around how they might want to be engaged, but I love the lead piece. So in the levels of engagement, I've just got a couple of slides here that just give some examples of what does advise or consult or include look like. So advise is, using service user feedback to inform the work, for example. Consult is consulting when organisations might be writing submissions, policy statements, for example. Include is when you're engaged as like members on advisory groups or in media articles that organisations might be speaking to. So you're complementing the work. Collaborate is when you are working together, for instance, in advocacy priorities together or meeting with government, with the organisation to do the work. Whereas lead, that is like lived experience advocates, owning organisations, leading at organisations or in the leadership roles, and lived experience advocates in co-development and co-creation of work, not just co-design, so actually working to create that. And lead was the whole vision that myself and the other victim survivor advocates had when we established the Independent Collective of Survivors. So our whole motivation was, we're tired of this down the bottom of the ladder stuff. We're going to create a voice that's led by lived experience for lived experience. So to me, that is the absolute gold model. So this slide just reinforces that the gold pyramid, the absolute gold is ownership and leadership on the work from the top down, because then that literally is nothing about us without us if we're leading that work. So this is a bit of a flow chart on how do we get there. So obviously, people like myself, we start out with our lived experience. There's a time in our healing journey where I think what happens for us is we start to realise, we want to make a change. And that's when I feel like a lot of us lean into like the mental health consumer advocacy or lived experience work. We know we want to make a difference, so we put ourselves up in there. So that is pivotal, that moment in when we go from having our lived experience and starting to turn that into expertise in the professional sense. So often many of us will start engaging in advocacy or consultancy work or advisory work. So that's sitting external to organisations and they engage us to do the work with them. And this is sort of the flow chart I took personally to get into the space. Next in the flow chart is, we become employed in organisations in lived experience work. So then we're internal, we're in the organisations and in some of the systems that we're trying to change. And then obviously the more senior role is managing other employees in lived experience work, and mentoring and bringing them in. That's some of my favourite work, is bringing others with me for the journey and giving them capacity to be able to do that. And then obviously, the leadership, which is at the very top of owning everything. So now I just want to speak to ethical and authentic practice. This is such a topic so close to my heart, because in the 10 years that I've been doing the work, I have seen some things done really badly. And as I've seen the things done really badly, I've seen some really brilliant advocates or emerging advocates become harmed or not have everything that they need to be able to become empowered in the advocacy space. And at this point in my journey in the work, I feel really strongly about speaking up to name up what it is that people should be doing in organisations if they're going to be engaging with lived experience to make this safe and ethical for us. So the foundational principles that should be overarching the work that we do with lived experience, most of these are probably familiar to you in the room, but these are the frameworks and principles that form the dirt that we put our feet in to make sure that we're building our advocacy and our safety and our capacity from the ground up. The first one is trauma-informed practice. So organisations, I think, need to have a really solid trauma-informed practice within their organisation if you're going to be working with victim survivor advocates or mental health advocates, because there's a significant amount of trauma that we might have already experienced. And if you don't have the trauma-informed practice piece there will be more harm caused to us. We won't be safe. By trauma-informed practice, I don't mean hopping on the internet and doing an hour-long module on trauma-informed practice. I mean actually doing it deeply at that deeper level with proper training that's delivered more comprehensively. So not just, I know what trauma-informed practice is, but I actually know how to use that and embed that. The other one is person-centred, and this one is common sense. It's always keeping people at the centre of everything you're doing, listening to what they need along the way, and making sure that they're always at the forefront of every bit of the work that you do. Human rights-based. I love to see this work really connected back to human rights conventions, because that's what we're here for, aren't we? To make the lives better for humans. So, yeah, I think having a good knowledge of human rights frameworks also helps us have an understanding of all the reasons why advocacy is important. And strengths-based practice. So this is really focusing on that, you know, advocates, yeah, we've been through some stuff, right? But in amongst all of that, we have strengths. Like, we know our stuff, we know what's best for us, and we have some absolutely brilliant skills and tools in our kit that we have to be able to navigate both life itself, but also working in the lived experience space. So always remembering none of that pity stuff for us, that we've got our own strengths in amongst that. We don't need that paternalistic way of working with us or speaking for us. So what does this look like in action? And I've developed this across multiple layers. I've got four subgroups that I have around what does this look like in action. And the first one's prepare. I do see sometimes organisations will decide we're going to do lived experience work. Let's do it. And then they just launch out there, going to do the work, and realise actually that preparation is not there. And this is so key. Before any organisation even thinks about engaging with lived experience, sit down and have a really close look if you're ready for this work. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, I've seen lived experience work become this cool thing to do, right? Everybody's doing it. Let's do it. But some people don't put the preparation in. So prepare looks like assessing your organisational readiness, making sure you're ready to do the work. Sustainably fund and remunerate. I have seen some really poor models of this where lived experience advocates are given a $20 gift card for 2 hours of work. So make sure you have the money there to begin with, because lived experience advocates, I believe, no longer should we be accepting that we're not worth money. So yeah, have your money there ready to use for whatever work you're engaging in, because we want to be paid for our time. And we want to be paid for our time at minimum, and I say minimum, award rate, at a casual rate. Appropriately resourced. This means have the staff on the ground to provide all the wraparound supports that you need. So this doesn't look like just having one person in an organisation that does lived experience work and they're all in isolation and there's none of the wraparounds. Make sure you have the people on the ground. An alignment with the values and the mission. So this is looking at your own organisation and going on a bit of a deep dive around, does lived experience work complement what we're doing in an organisation? But in return, can an organisation provide that piece that supports people's individual values and mission in advocacy? Because they may be out of alignment. So that's an important piece to look at. The next section is safety. I cannot stress this enough. Like, if we're not safe to do the work, we're going to be harmed. And if we're not safe, that's not healing for us. So safety is be inclusive and accessible. And this means, accommodating for things like disability, or being LGBTIQA+, being First Nations people. If your model in your organisation for lived experience engagement is white, abled, straight, like not acknowledging any of that diversity that we have as humans, then straight up, that safety can't be guaranteed for advocates. Choice and control. So this is give advocates choice and control all along the way. That means to engage in whatever opportunities you're offering, but also the choice to not, to step back if need be, and no judgment be cast around that. Because I know as people with mental health issues, we can dip in and out a bit, like we have to manage our well-being. So just respecting that all along the way. Assess the risk and readiness. So the other piece was assessing the organisational readiness. This is more about assessing risk and readiness for advocates to make sure that they're safe and prepared to do the work. And then capture and action feedback. So this is really listening to advocates when they give you feedback and how to improve things, not just, parking up a survey and saving it on your laptop. It's really listening to that. Relationship is the relationship building part, so building that trust, because if we don't trust, we're not going to engage in the work properly. Accountability. So if in an organisation advocates call you out on stuff that you're doing, you actually lean back in with transparency and accountability and be willing to sit with uncomfortableness and work with that. Managing conflict. This is important because this will happen. It will absolutely happen, and how organisations manage that in a sensitive way is so important, because sometimes, conflict poorly managed will mean that advocates will just leave the work. And identify and address power imbalances, and they will be there whenever there's an organisation that's working with advocates. There's always a power imbalance, because organisations hold the money, they hold the resources, they hold everything that's there to provide opportunities. So really looking at where that power works in an organisation and the privileges that are held and how that impacts advocates. And the last one is support. This is building peer support. This is so important. There's some organisation models I've seen where individual advocates are engaged to do the work, but there's not a piece to bring them all together at any point in time. So it leaves advocates feeling really isolated. And the beauty of the peer support is people learn from each other, and we get solidarity, and we get stronger by having that community piece. Provide training. So not everybody's ready to do advocacy and might need some training around basic skills like speaking to media or how to speak to government. That's important. Fund that, provide that, or ask us what we need to be able to do the work. Formal and informal supports. So this is around formal supports is what do advocates have in the way of therapeutic counselling, psychology, medical team, whatever's there supporting them in the work. And informal is asking them and establishing what's in their family, friends, pets, what do they do for their own self-care? Because that's important too. Listen to need. So this is always just listening to what do people need. Ask them what they need, particularly when things aren't going okay. Lean in with that curiosity and ask them, what do you need? Never forget that that's there too. Managing power imbalances. This is such an interesting piece because, like I said in the other slides, it's there. There's always power there. Something that I use as a resource when I'm examining power or working with advocates who are telling me that they're noticing that there's a power indifference. I use this little tool, which is so great. It's a power and privilege wheel adapted from Sylvia Duckworth's wheel of power and privilege. And it just depicts on the inside, you know, who holds the most power in society. And then around the outside is who holds less power. So it just lets us examine visually, you know, like, where do you hold power and privilege? Where are you marginalised? If you're an organisation working with advocates, asking yourself, where do the lived experience advocates sit that you're engaging with, in contrast to where you might be sitting if you're working with them. But also being really self-reflective and self-examining how you might be using power. And I don't necessarily mean just consciously, but unconsciously. So there's a whole big self-examination piece in that for both organisations, but for you as victim survivor advocates as well. I mean, for me, every part of me sits around the outside wheel personally, except I'm financially privileged. So, you know, like even people who have every other form of, like I've got 5 forms of marginalisation, I have financial privilege. So even I have some power there as well. And power can look like these types. I'm being mindful of time, so I won't go too deep with these. But there's power over. This is where it's all domination and control. People are making decisions for people. It's based on fear and creates walls. This is the absolute no model to what we want in advocacy, because this power over looks like the experiences we've had in lived experience, whether that be from perpetrators of violence or whether that is in the psychiatric system where all our power has been taken away, or in any other context where we've had no power. So we don't want to be sitting in the power over model, because that will re-traumatise us and it doesn't have a foundation for us doing the work. Whereas the other models of power with, power to and power within, this is sharing your power together, building teamwork, collaborating. It's handing power to advocates to take control of their lives, their narratives, their stories, their agency. It creates all manner of possibilities for them to use their lived experience in expertise. And then the power in, this is letting people, this is giving people the power within themselves to make a difference, and then start sharing that power with others. My reflections on the work. So the top 3 things not to do are here, and it's don't be tokenistic. You know, don't do the ticker box thing and just do lived experience because it's cool. Don't exploit. Make sure you're paying people. Don't burn them out with all of your consultations, and fund the work. Misuse of power. Something I see often is ownership of advocates, and this is very real. So this is when organisations have advocates and they hold them to their own and they can't go and do work anywhere else. But becoming the system itself, I sometimes see this in the sector due to various different factors. And forgetting your role. Don't become a martyr. If you're working with lived experience, like managing lived experience, we don't, you know, don't speak for advocates. They can speak for themselves, and don't do the work to boost your ego. I quite often say this, and I'm quite blunt with what I say, like, don't use it as that piece that, you know, if you're someone working in an organisation and you're at a dinner party and you're having a wine and you're having a yarn about how great it is that you're working with lived experience because it makes you feel good. top things to remember are listen. Just listen to advocates all along the way. Pay them. This is real work. Don't expect people to do work under that guise of giving an opportunity or they might like to volunteer. Pay us. Support, obviously unpacked that before, make sure all the support's there. And then self-care. So if you're a practitioner working with lived experience, know your own triggers, know your signs of burnout, do your own personal work, know when to step back. But also if you're an advocate yourself, these are so important for staying well or you will not sustain the work. And I learned all of this the hard way. Nobody gave me the tools for the self-care and I had to learn by crashing and burning along the way. Sometimes still do. Just like to finish with a quote from ICOS. We wrote the introduction in the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, and I think this is really relevant for the mental health space, so I really wanted to share this. The quote is, "We are not damaged goods. We are not incapable or less than you because we experience trauma. We are survivors. We will not be silenced, pushed into the shadows, nor spoken for anymore. We hold knowledge and answers others simply do not. We are diverse, but galvanised by a common cause. We know what needs to change. No meaningful solutions can be made about us without us." So I just want to leave on that note and let us hold that there to think about. Every step of the way, it should be with us, not about us. So if you're an organisation out there working in lived experience, what I shared today, I'm hoping that that gives you something to work with. But if you're one of the brilliant advocates that are out there, what I've presented today, please use this as your audit tool because we shouldn't be asking for any less than the work being ethical and safe for us. Thank you. I'll hand over to Ben, who'll be able to tell me how much we have, what time we have for questions, because we had that little glitch at the start with some text. So
yeah, we've got time for a couple of questions, perhaps. But there's actually two that are quite similar. So I was thinking of merging those. So if I was to paraphrase them together, it would say whether an organization is on the beginning of their journey and wanting to their interest in involving themselves with lived experience work, or if I can just sort of track this one in here as well, or identifies that they are not ready and because they don't have the structure, framework, or the supports in place. What advice would you have for them beginning, and if they identify that there's still some work to do before we can actually execute on this stuff?
Yeah, at the beginning, I think I would really pitch for look at this in co-design. So if you're an organisation that's identified that you want to do this work, don't just start trying to do the work. Establish an advisory group or a consultancy group that have the lived experience in it that you want to work with and ask them, what do they think this work should look like in the organisation? What do people want? So right from that very beginning, engage that lived expertise. I think that's so important, and I don't see that done a lot. Usually organisations will build everything, then launch for people to be engaged. So, yeah, I think that should be there from the beginning. Yeah.
Beautiful. And this one little quick one is an attendee said, in my experience, lived experience programs struggle to sustain long-term funding. How can this be addressed in your perspective?
Oh gosh, I can't
I know it's a big one.
tell you how many programs I've worked in where this is a problem and we are running off the smell of an oily rag or the latest donation from a philanthropist to keep the work going. I think what needs to happen here, and we're doing this all the time in the work that I'm doing, is advocating to government to really learn the importance of this work and understand that that lived experience work, you know, that's the next part of healing for us. So this is part of our recovery, our healing, and to start funding as if that's part of that, like the wellness and the health. So I think until we can get governments to understand that this is part of that, we may struggle to have that sustainable funding. So I'm all for advocating to get the funding, to do the advocating, not giving up, and just probably being like me and always out there ranting somewhere about how this needs to be funded. So there's an advocacy piece just in that in itself. What I learned from establishing ICOS with the other victim survivors is we are stronger together. So if you're just one little person ranting to the government about funding, it's not as strong as if you actually come together and do that more coordinated piece. Yeah.
Beautiful. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left. There were some other questions, but I would encourage everyone again on the stream to hold on to those questions, direct them through to the Finding North Network, connect with Tess. And I just want to say thank you so much, Tess. One quick one. What do you do for self-care? If you had to pick the thing for you, what do you do?
There's probably 3 things I do for self-care. One is I spend a lot of time in the forest.
Nice.
So that's how I ground and reconnect and stay well, is knowing that there's a world out there, because this work can be so intense and we get so engaged in it that we forget that there's a world out there. And the other thing that I do is I go to the gym and I lift ridiculously heavy weights for my size.
Nice.
And that also helps me get out of head and into body. So yeah, keeping my body moving is something that I use for self-care. But the third thing is connecting with community. Community keeps me here. I can't do this without them. And they're the ones that I go to when I'm ready to chuck in the towel, and they always bring me back, re-energize me. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, couldn't resonate with that deeply enough. Thank you so much, Tess. Pleasure to see you again. And thank you for your presentation. Loved it.
Thank you. I'd love anybody to reach out to me if they want to have a yarn in any way. So, yeah, you can find me in the details provided. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tess.
Thanks for watching Explore More Perspectives 2024 on Finding North Network's YouTube channel. Find out more by visiting findingnorthnetwork.com.au or email info@findingnorthnetwork.com.au.